Hello everyone, today's topic is on the strategy for the venture. Strategy is a central concept in modern management practice. This chapter will look at business strategy from the entrepreneurial perspective by considering the value of a well-defined strategy to the venture and the way in which entrepreneurs can control strategy development. The learning objectives of this topic is to understand the key elements of the business strategy for the entrepreneurial venture, to understand approaches for strategy creation, and to understand various approaches for entrepreneurial entry strategies. First of all, let's look what is a business strategy. A strategy can be defined broadly as the actions an organization takes to pursue its business objectives. In another word, a strategy is the means by which the venture will achieve its aim. Strategy drives performance, and logically, an effective strategy results in a good performance. There are three key elements of a business strategy: the strategy content, strategy process, and environmental context. The strategy content relates to what the business actually does, whereas the strategy process relates to the way the business decides what it is going to do. And finally, the environmental context. There is the external factors which influence the business activity. Strategy content has three distinct decision areas. The first one is the products to be offered, that is product range. The second one is the markets to be targeted. We call it as a market scope. And the third one is the approach taken to competing, right? Or the competitive approach that the venture take. Strategy content must be consistent with the entrepreneur's vision and mission they have defined for the venture. Strategy content dictates the decision about investment of resources the business must undertake to pursue its objectives, that is the financial resources, the operating resources, as well as the human resources. This is the explanation for the three areas of the strategy content of a venture. For the product range, it covers the type of range of products that the firm supplies to its markets, right? And it is used here in general sense to include both tangible and intangible products. Okay, whereas the market scope defines the customer groups and market segments that will be addressed by the firm. Right, the key decisions involve the total market to define, features of the customers in terms of the customer types, the needs, buying behavior, the customer location, and etc. The competitive approach refers to the way in which the firm competes within its product market domain to sustain and develop its business in the face of competitive pressures. Right? Some of the important decisions to be made in relation to this approach is how should the product price relative to competitors, and what distribution route will be used to get the product to the customer, what financial rewards and incentives will be offered to the intermediaries or distributors. So these are examples of competitive approach. The second key element of the strategy is strategy process. The firm's strategy process is the way in which the business makes decisions about the strategy content it wishes to achieve. So it is reflected in the way the organization considers its future, how it selects its goals, and the way it decides how to allocate resources in order to achieve the goal. Strategy process is an internal decision making. In other words, it's embedded in the structure, system, and processes that the organization adopts, as well as its culture and the leadership style of the entrepreneur running it. To entrepreneur, when they make decision, right, there are two main approaches, right, when they create a strategy. It can be either a deliberate or planned approach or emergent approach, right? For deliberate approach, right, sometimes we call it as the traditional top-down approach, right? They create strategy in which the strategic policy for the venture is clearly defined by entrepreneur, and the instructions for objectives and budgets are passed down to the organization, right? So this is top-down approach or deliberate approach. Another approach for strategy creation is emergent approach, right? It also called as a modern bottom-up approach for strategy creation. in which entrepreneur concentrates on managing the venture's short-term capabilities and exploiting opportunities that present themselves as the business moves forward. So it's a more bottom-up. So the decision is from the employee and up to the management of the company. Okay, these are some of the advantages and drawbacks for strategy creation approaches, right? We will differentiate in order to differentiate between a deliberate approach and emergent approach. Okay? As you can see here, for deliberate approach in terms of clarity of purpose, so it's a planned strategy, right? It's a top-down, it's a strict formal planning and suitable for long-term plan. Therefore, it's a less failure, less faulty in management due to stated vision, goals and intended outcomes. So it's already stated there, this is the goal, this is the vision, and this is the outcome that should be achieved. In terms of the drawbacks, right, it might have a theory flawed. So usually not show a strong correlation with business performance, can be theory flawed. So in literature, stated in the research, right, a deliberate strategy approach not necessarily influence good performance to the company. So it's theory flawed, right? For emerging strategy approach, or we call it as bottom up, the advantage, one of the advantages is flexibility. So it is suitable for short-term strategic plan and based on current capabilities of the entrepreneur and venture in exploiting opportunities, right? But the drawbacks is loss of direction, less concern with where the business is going because there's no stated vision and goals or intended outcome given. So it might less concern, right, loss of direction. Just make sure it goes somewhere interesting. So it's just do it like that. So this is a emergent strategy approach. Okay, for the deliberate strategy, right, the second advantages are determined by its leadership. Okay, planning for the future is the primary responsibility of entrepreneur. So the leadership determine all the managerial aspects of the venture. And it's the drawbacks, of course, since the leadership is controlled by the manager or owner of the company or venture, so it's quite rigid, right? So increase an organization rigidity and lower its speed of responsiveness in the event of changes. In terms of emergent strategy advantage, right, it is more responsive, right, because it's a bottom up, okay, can be perfectly good managerial approach to developing through good bottom up leadership, listen from the stakeholders or listen from the employee, right, as sources for strategy creation. So stakeholders are the sources here, the sources of information to create strategy, right? But for drawbacks, it might be influence to flawed planning, right? Because there's no stated plan, stated vision and goal. So the vision and goal is not explicitly intended. This can lead to flawed strategic planning. Alright, the final examples of advantages and drawbacks for deliberate strategy is the advantage focus on a particular desired outcome, right? Because they stated, as I mentioned to you just now, stated vision, stated goals and intended outcome. So easier for employees or stakeholders to understand, right? Because they already stated there and identify and work towards a common collective purpose at minimized level of deviation from the intended objective. But the drawbacks is less flexible, less suitable for fast-growing entrepreneurial venture or for business in unpredictable environment, right? So, for example, like if there's a crisis or economic crisis or political crisis or like now we have pandemic crisis, if we just follow the same vision and goals or intended outcomes, so it might be less flexible. So it's quite difficult to achieve during the unpredictable environment. For emergent strategy approach, the advantage in terms of desired outcome is encourage innovation, right? It could promote a workplace culture of entrepreneurial innovation because it allows free flow of ideas in the venture. So it encourages innovation. But there is a drawbacks of this for this emergent strategy in terms of absence of clear strategic direction. So of course they have innovative idea, but what is the direction, right? So organizations, participants are provided with clear and ambiguous sense of direction. Ambiguous, right? Very unclear. Okay. All right. To argue whether a deliberate approach or emergent approach is the most suitable for a venture, so there is no empirical evidence said that, right, that deliberate approach is the good approach to be practiced by a venture in order to achieve a better performance. No, there is no empirical evidence said that. It is the most important part is planning. Planning is work greatly, right? If the future can be predicted with some uncertainty. So if we do make sure we take into consideration the uncertainty part aspect, right? The uncertainty environment, the unpredictable situation that will arrive right in the future. So that's how we make plan. Okay. An entrepreneurial venture would be expected to gain in the following ways from investing in developing a strategy and communicating it to stakeholders, right? Some of them are, right, encourages entrepreneurs to assess and articulate their vision, ensures auditing of the organization and its environment, right? Eliminates new possibilities and latitudes, provides organizational focus, guides the structuring of the organization, act as a guide to decision making, provides a starting point for the setting of objective, and lastly, act as a common language for stakeholders.